Hello and welcome back to my channel. It is time to do my favorite books of 2025. I'm sorry I'm late. I know everybody has already moved on, but you should know by now that I do things in my own time. Also, it's a video that is basically a list of fantastic books, so anytime is a good time for that, I'd say. I thought this year I would do a book bracket. I got this idea and also the template you're gonna see in a minute from Ruby Red, and the original idea is to pick a favorite book for each month and then pit them against each other in pairs until you finally end up with the best book of the year. Now I just went with my top 12 favorite books rather than doing monthly favorites, just because some reading months were significantly better than others, and then some would have like multiple favorites, and I didn't want to, you know, just pick one of those, and then other months I would have to book that I didn't like as much as just because it was the best I read that particular month, even though I liked it less than the number 2 or 3 books from other months, if that makes sense. I just want to make sure I get to talk about my actual favorite books. Okay, so here is the bracket. I've put all the books in already. I assigned them to random spots. I didn't film that, so you just have to trust me on that. And I'll talk about all the books first, and then at the end we'll have the showdown of the books, I guess we could call it. So starting at the top, we have Lily is Crying by Helene Bisset. This is translated from the French by Kate Briggs, who we may see later on again. This was first published in its original language in 1953. I think the first time it was published in English was last year. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it's definitely been out of print for a long time. I picked this up in the States last summer. It's published by New Directions, and I saw that what's that publisher called with the blue books? Wow, it just went completely out of my head. Fitzcarraldo Editions has published it on this side of the pond. I really hope that more people will pick it up because it is very original. You know how everyone was suddenly reading I Who Have Never Known Men a few years ago, and I kind of want that to happen to this book as well. So in essence, this book is about a mother and daughter relationship. They live in a country house in rural France. The mother runs a bed and breakfast, and their relationship is strained, to say the least. The mother is very manipulative and domineering, and the daughter wants to break free of that, but also feels a dependency and an obligation to her mother, and it just really creates this constant push and pull dynamic between them. The thing that really stands out in this book is the writing style, because it is not like anything I've read before. I've described it before as kind of being impressionist. It's really sort of quickly describing scenes and thoughts and conversations in a very kind of staccato manner. It has a lot of repetition, and it kind of lures you in with this rhythm, in the rhythm of the story, and it makes it feel a little bit uncomfortable and unsettling. Yeah, I was really impressed by this. I really liked it, and I really think more people should be reading this book. It only had 68 ratings on the Storygraph I saw the other day, and that really needs to be higher in my opinion. Then we've got Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. This is one of those books that I picked up because I just knew I was gonna love it. I even put off reading it because what if it wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, but I needn't have worried. This was everything I wanted it to be. In this book we have two sisters, and they have just lost their mother due to a suicide. Their father is not really in the picture, so they are raised by a succession of different family members, and ultimately and more importantly, by their aunt. Their aunt is a very eccentric type. She's used to a pretty nomadic lifestyle. She kind of wanders through the world, lives on the fringes of society, and just doesn't generally fit in, which is an interesting combination with these two girls trying to find some stability after having lost their mother. That the two sisters each have their own way to deal with the situation is a theme going throughout the book. This is the kind of book that has everything I love in it. It's kind of a slow book, but it still has enough of a plot to drive the story forward. The writing is very lyrical and very beautiful. It has great characters. I think the setting of the story is a character on its own. It has like slight feminist and kind of witchy vibes. There's a lot of atmosphere. I know people will marry a book when it makes them fly through it, and this is kind of the opposite of that. It makes you want to slow down and savor every minute, and you know, it's a book that is just so rich in language that just reading a few pages at a time will leave you satisfied, and that is something that I really love in books. Next we have Dragonhaven by Robin Hobb. This is like smack in the middle of her 16 book series, so there's no point really talking about the plot. I'm not a big fantasy reader, but this series I really love. Her character writing is phenomenal. The pacing is always spot on. She takes her time to explore the magic, the characters, the political intrigue, but then right when you're feeling a little too secure, she'll like shake things up again. I was a little bit nervous going into this particular book just because I didn't like the previous book as much as I did all the others, but I really needn't have worried, and honestly a little part of me putting it on this list is just the relief I felt when realizing Robin Hobb was back at her old form in this book. I always save up the next book in this series for when I really want to read it, because I'm very aware of the fact that even though it is a long series, it is not endless. So yeah, that's what I did with this book again. I saved it for a special occasion and I savored every minute of it. Then we have How Green Was My Family by Richard Llewellyn. This is not a perfect book, and I can tell you now that it won't be my favorite book of the year. It's a book with flaws, it's far from perfect, but I just really loved reading this book. It's pure vibes. In this book you read from the perspective from a man called Hugh, and he is looking back at his life growing up in a small mining town in Wales at the turn of the 20th century. It's about the industrialization of the area he lives in, the like landscape that's changing, and also the changes he notices in his community, how, you know, the community is getting less and less close. And the book kind of turns into a love letter to Wales, sometimes maybe a bit too sentimental a love letter, but I didn't mind. It's about the love for his town, the people in it, the mountains, his family, also his love for music and singing. Like in this book they sing at every occasion, and now I am obsessed with Welsh choir singing. So please comment down below your favorite Welsh hymns, because I need to hear them. Then we have the first non-fiction in this list. There's one more later on, and that is All She Carried by Tia Miles. The subtitle is The Journey of Ashley's Sack, a Black Family Keepsake, and the book centers this bag, this like cotton sack. I don't have the book at hand, but the sack has embroidery on it where it says like this sack belonged to Ashley, and it contained like a couple of objects. I think it was a handful of pecans, a dress, and a few other things I can't remember. And it was embroidered by Ashley's one of Ashley's descendants. So yeah, Tia Miles uses this sack as a starting off point of the book. She goes into the history of the women that are named on this sack, what we know of them, what their lives would likely have been like as enslaved people in South Carolina. She goes into their particular histories, but also a more general history of the Deep South, how the slave trade came to that area, and you know, the horrors that millions of black people went through at the time. And then the author also keeps on circling back to the sack as an object, as a thing, and she dives into every detail and how everything about this is significant. The sack itself, the things that were in the sack, you know, the dress and the pecans, and the other things that I can't remember right now, and how together they kind of represent everything that Ashley needed, shelter, clothes, food, and like a link to her own family and her own history. And then also into the fact that one of her descendants years later decided to embroider the sack, and how important it is that she wrote down her family's story and the words she decided to use and the order of the words, and the fact that she did this in embroidery and, you know, rather than write it on paper. Tia Miles' writing is beautiful in this book. I think the research is meticulous. I love it when a non-fiction has a lot of notes, because it shows where the author gets their information from, and I love how she took like this at first glance kind of plain object. It was in fact at some point thrown away until someone found it at a garage sale. She takes this sort of unassuming object and writes an entire story out of it. And I'd say, even though this object represents a horrible period of history, and the author definitely does not shy away from exploring that, I think ultimately the story that this sack tells us is one of love and hope. Yeah, I was really very impressed by this book. I loved how the author wove all the different elements of this together, and I thought it was so good. And then the last one on the left hand side is The Long Form by Kate Briggs. This is one of those books that's a little bit hard to define or hard to explain. The opening scene of this book is one of the best opening scenes in a book I've ever read. It's of a woman named Helen, and she is kind of pacing through her living room trying to get her newborn to sleep, and it's just so well done. It's very stuck in a bubble, claustrophobic, desperate kind of vibe it gives off. And that scene ends when, like, just as Helen has put her baby down to sleep, the doorbell rings for the postman to deliver a package. And that package is a second-hand copy of the novel Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. We follow Helen and her baby throughout the day. We see Helen caring for her daughter, and then also reading Tom Jones, the novel. And then mixed in with the story of Helen, there are also like small philosophical musings, almost like short essays about the novel as an art form. It's where the title comes from as well. The novel is the long form of literature. I feel like this is a book I would need to read again to comprehend it more, but I remember when I read it, I just let the story take me along. Sort of the fiction and non-fiction parts of the book really seamlessly blend into each other, and the reading flows really easily. You know, I would want to highlight a passage that I found interesting, but then I'd find myself highlighting entire pages because the ideas just followed each other so naturally that it was kind of hard to know where one thing began and the other ended. And yeah, I think that really shows how intricately done this is. Just how Helen's life parallels the book that Helen is reading, which also parallels the novel as an art form, also parallels me reading the novel, and yeah, it all just sort of blends together. So yeah, it's maybe not a book where I am always entirely sure what's going on. I don't entirely grasp all the ideas in this book, but it did kind of fire up something in my brain. You know, kind of pathways and connections that weren't there before. I love it when books do that. You know, the thing with making favorites lists is that I want to reread all these books, but this one especially because I think I can still get so much more out of this. Okay, let's move on to the other side. First we have The Girls by John Bowen. Was this a cover by? Yes. Was it everything I hoped it would be? Also yes. I had such a good time with this. It is set in a small village in England in the 1970s. It's about two women living together, kind of self-sufficiently, making their own jams and cheese and all that, and they sell them at farmers markets, and they just keep themselves to themselves in general. At the beginning of the book, one of them is panicking a little bit because they're still quite young and already very much settled, and she's afraid that if she doesn't experience something out of her comfort zone, she might miss out on things. So she takes a solo trip to Greece for a bit of a change of scenery. And then meanwhile, the other woman, I remember they're called Jeanette and Susan, but I can't remember which is which. The one who stays at home is kind of getting stuck in a thought spiral, thinking the other one in Greece is surely not only having a good time in the sun, but also, you know, enjoying bronzed and scarcely clad men. So she's distraught and she ends up sleeping with this guy she knows from the farmer's market. But when they are reunited again, they say they have both been miserable and they never want to be apart again, and they live happily ever after, except one of them is pregnant now. And I think that's all I say. No, I think I'll say that there is a crime in this book, but it is handled in the most sort of matter-of-factly, light-hearted, offbeat kind of way. Like English cottagecore, keep calm and have a cuppa kind of crime. But still, it has some depth, it has something to say. It's at heart a story about two people caring for each other and choosing each other and supporting each other during hard times. But also it has a murder that would not be out of place in a game of Clue. Yeah, I think of all the books on this list, this is the book I would most safely recommend to other people, because I think it will appeal to a lot of different types of readers. So yeah, that's that one. The next one is How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, which is the other non-fiction book in this list. This was one of those books that I was 100% sure I was gonna love because of the topic of the book, but also because of how it's structured. In this book, the author goes to, I think it's 7 or 8 different locations, most of them in the United States and the one in Senegal. All these locations are connected to slavery in some way. You know, there are places that are open to the public to visit, and he also then takes a tour of these places, goes to a talk or like something, because this book is about the history of those different places, but also about how the history is told. obviously when you take a tour of a historical landmark, that's like an hour and a half. The tour guide can't tell everything. So the author looks at what angle they take, what they focus on, you know, what narrative they are telling. Also who is giving the tour, who is visiting these places, and how do tour guides answer questions people have. I love nonfiction about history, but especially about like relearning history and realizing that the same event can be looked at from different angles, and you'll get a different story depending on who gets the chance to tell the history, and you know, how much it matters what kind of words you use. I also find it interesting to learn about how history repeats itself, seeing how history kind of develops over time, and seeing why it's so important to know history to recognize patterns that come back today. So that is How the Words Passed. Man, I read some really good books this year. This list is just, yeah, I love reading. Okay, what's up next? Ooh, Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, which was the very first book I read this year, you know, setting the bar way high. It's probably also the most popular book on this list. I feel like everyone has read this, but that is for good reason. This book is set in the 1980s in a small Irish town, and it's centered around a man named Bill. He's a man with a family of, I think, 4 or 5 daughters. He works as a coal merchant, and since it's the days leading up to Christmas, it's a very busy time for him at work. He's delivering coal all over town. He doesn't get to spend as much time with his family as he would like. During one of these deliveries at a local Catholic convent, he witnesses something that will change his view on life and his trajectory forever. The story is really steeped in the history of the Magdalen laundries, which were institutions operating in Ireland from the 18th century until as recently, I think, as 1995, 96. These were places run by the Catholic Church, kind of advertised as mother-baby homes, where unwed pregnant women could go if they were not welcome anywhere else. It was kind of seen as a charity and a place where they could recuperate, but in fact these were places where they were doing forced labor and where they were abused in multiple ways. And along with that, and I think probably even more important for this story, is the power that the Catholic Church had in the community. You know, they had a finger in many pies, and because of that there was a fear among people to speak out, even if they knew the truth of what was going on. The absolute strength of Claire Keegan is her writing. It is so exquisite and so precise. I've said before that she's a writer that writes between the lines and she writes in the margins. And what I mean by that is that there's not actually that much happening on the page, but so much is said with what is not being said. You know, what is said with a look or the way someone holds themselves, the way someone walks, and she trusts you to fill the gaps in yourself. And yeah, that's really where her writing really shines. Next is Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian by Hazel Jane Plant. And this was definitely something else. The protagonist of this is a trans woman, and she is cleaning out the apartment of her best friend Vivian, who is also a trans woman who has recently passed away. So she's just going through her things, and in that you learn that Vivian had a couple of things she loved, a few kind of obsessions. One was encyclopedias, which she would like read and annotate and you know, add her own entries into it. And then the other was a fictional TV show called Little Blue, which she would watch together with our narrator, and the narrator decides that she wants to create her own encyclopedia of the TV show Little Blue and just go through all the characters in the TV show and then put them in alphabetical order and tell a little bit about them. And then she also adds her own thoughts on the show, what it meant to her and Vivian, what it meant to their friendship. So it's a book about art and creating, about creating as a grief process, as a way to honor someone. It's not something that she intends for anyone else to read. It's something she does to remember her best friend. It's also about the importance of pop culture and how things that may seem trivial to one person can hold a lot of meaning to someone else. How the shared love of a TV show or music or, you know, whatever can really bring people together, and, you know, friendships are formed over those kind of things. And, you know, it's kind of like we do here on BookTube with our, you know, silly little books. So yeah, it's a book about grief, so of course it's sad, but it is also about so much more, and it really made me think, and I love how it was just original and not like anything I've read before. And yeah, also definitely more people need to be reading this book. Okay, we're getting to the last two books. We have Daddy's Gone Hunting by Penelope Mortimer. I read two McNally editions this year and they both ended up on my favorites, and I'm a little bit obsessed with them. This book was first published in the 1950s and it's about a woman named Ruth. She's a housewife. She lives in a small English village. Her husband works in London and he stays there during the week. Her twin sons are at boarding school. Her daughter is at university, and which means she's home alone a lot of the time, and she feels very stuck in her life. She feels like all she does is go to meaningless coffee dates and bridge parties. The reason she married her husband was because she felt pregnant and getting married was the only option at the time. But it is a really loveless marriage, and her husband is really self-absorbed and kind of mean to her. And this book describes how she sinks into depression. The combination of like the stifling monotony of her life and the lack of agency she experiences, and the expectations that society puts on her. It really makes her feel like she is stuck with no way out, and I think the way it depicts that feeling of suffocation and dread, it just does that really well. The horror of feeling stuck. Another part of the novel is when her daughter falls pregnant, and this kind of ignites a passion in Ruth. She's really desperate for her daughter not to fall into the same trap that she has, and she helps her to get an abortion, which was at that time and place illegal. So that's an important aspect of the book as well, and I find it really interesting to see this as a kind of a time capsule of feminist issues at the time, and the gender dynamics back then, and how they compare to current times. So yeah, this is another one I can really recommend, obviously because it's my favorite books. The writing is really sharp, the dialogue is well done, her writing feels really fresh and precise, and yeah, I think it really fits the tone of the book. Alright, so the last book is Maud Martha by Gwendolyn Brooks. This one was also first published in the 1950s, but then on the other side of the world. This is one of those quiet gems kind of books. So like not a lot of plot, but beautiful prose, and even though not much happens, it still really packs a punch. This book is about Maud Martha. We follow her through part of her life from when she's a young girl until she's pregnant with her first or second child. So like in her late 20s, I think she was. I really loved the character of Maud. She is a very graceful character, but also really knows what she wants in life, and she has a real tenacity to her. She lives in Chicago, and it's a very kind of normal, uneventful life. And this book is just kind of snippets of that life. The chapters in this book are very short, and each chapter is like a small glimpse into that life. Almost like you're taking a picture of just a scene or a moment or a conversation, and then the next chapter is just another moment. Gwendolyn Brooks was a poet. This was her only novel, and you can see that she is really a master at capturing moments. Not a word is wasted in this book, and she still gets to the heart of the matter so very precisely. Yeah, it's very stunning. It's the kind of writing that just makes me go, God, I love language and you know what it can do. Yeah, even though this book is sort of quiet and unassuming, it still handles some big themes like race and gender and class and the intersectionality of those. But it's about big themes in small ways, in like day-to-day settings. Yeah, a book that is both subtle and deeply emotional, and yes, very, very well executed. Alright, so those were all the books I put in my top 12. Let's see how they compete against each other. Before I do that, I should say that of course I would recommend all 12 books, even if they don't go on to the next round. This whole thing is going to go completely on vibes and could have different results on different days. Okay, it is now an hour later and I've lost the will to live. I have tried to screen record this book bracket for so many times and it doesn't seem to work. So I am just gonna record myself whilst I'm looking at my computer doing the book bracket, and I will add the graphics later on because I've had enough. And this is supposed to be a fun video because this is my best book of 2025, you know? So, let's see. The first pairing we've got is Kate, no, not Kate Briggs, that's going on later. It's Lily is Crying versus Housekeeping. And I will put forward Housekeeping just because that's going to be one of my favorite books of all time. You know, Lily is Crying is one of my favorite books of the year. Housekeeping is like on another level. So we're gonna continue that to the next square. Next is Dragonhaven. First is How Green Was My Valley. That is gonna go to Dragonhaven. How Green Was My Valley was great as well, but that was definitely more flawed. Not that Dragonhaven is flawless, but yeah, quality-wise, that was definitely better. Then we've got the long form versus All That She Carried. This I'm gonna go for All That She Carried just because I think for a non-fiction book, it just really does everything I love in non-fiction. The long form was also great, but I feel like I did not capture everything I could get out of this book to put it forward at this point. Then on the right hand side we've got The Girls versus How the Word is Passed. Now, I think How the Word is Passed is probably the better book out of the two, but I just have a real soft spot for The Girls, so I'm gonna move on that one, because why the hell not? And then we've got Small Things Like These versus Little Blue Encyclopedia. and this is gonna go to Little Blue Encyclopedia just because it's so original. Does something I haven't seen before, and also, you know, small things like these has enough readers. It doesn't, you know, need any more of my endorsement. So that's what's going in that spot. And then the last one in the first round is Maud Martha versus Daddy's Gone Hunting, and I'm gonna put forward Maud Martha just because the writing this was so beautiful. And they both address interesting topics, but yeah, I liked Maud Martha better. And that's what this is all about. So that is the first round. Let's move on again to see which ones are going through. So we've got Housekeeping versus Dragonhaven. It's going to go to Housekeeping because, yeah, like I said, it's going to be an all-time favorite. Dragonhaven I loved, but it's not my favorite Robin Hobb I've read, so Housekeeping is going to the next spot. Then we've got Maud Martha versus All That She Carried. Yeah, definitely All That She Carried, just because that book really stayed with me. They are both very well executed. But yeah, All That She Carried is a book that I have been thinking about a lot more than I have been thinking about Maud Martha. And then The Girls versus Little Blue Encyclopedia. This is gonna go to Little Blue Encyclopedia just because I think that book made me think a whole lot more. The Girls was really sort of fun whilst reading it, but Little Blue Encyclopedia has more staying power, in my opinion. So now we've got the top three, and I think this really represents my reading style actually, so I'm very excited that I ended up with these three. I think in Housekeeping we've got a beautifully written, atmospheric, lyrical kind of literary fiction story, a backlist title that had kind of has stood the test of time. All That She Carried, fantastic non-fiction book with an original approach of a topic that, even though it's discussed a lot of times in non-fiction, there is still so much to learn about it, and yeah, I loved learning in this. And then Little Blue Encyclopedia, indie published, does something original in the way it's written, queer elements to it. Yeah, I feel like these three really sum up my reading taste, so I'm very excited about this. Also makes it impossible to choose because they do three really different things. Having said that, I think the winner of this is going to be Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson, because it's a book that I think I can reread over and over again and get something new out of it. The characters in this book feel really special to me, and yeah, like I've been saying throughout this video, it's become an all-time favorite rather than just a favorite for this year. So that's it, we've got a winner. The winner is Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Like I said, I recommend all these books. Also, this might have turned out differently if I played it another day, but as of now, I'm very happy with this, and like especially very happy with the top three books. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to know your favorite books of 2025. Yeah, tell me if you've read any of these books, if you are excited to read any of these books after hearing me talk about them, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.